Well, like an old bear coming out of hibernation in the middle of March and up here in the Great White North, I decided it's warming up enough outside that I'm going to start getting back out in the shop and getting some videos out. And first one that I'm going to work on is around this guy. I picked this up in October of last year. It's a 2007 Subaru 2.5, not a turbo, not a WRX, not an STI. I picked this up because around that time, when I was driving my truck, diesel prices were almost $2 a liter. And when you're commuting almost 80 kilometers one way into work and almost 160 kilometers round trip, it gets expensive very quickly. In my truck, I'd be filling at about $150, give or take, on a tank of fuel. And that would usually last me, give or take, 3 days, 2.5 days, depending on how much driving I did in between driving to work. So I decided I'm going to start looking for cars to help ease off the offset of that. And I came across this one. Originally, when I picked this up, I seen it in the wanted ads or in the for sale ads. And the guy was asking, I think, $2,500, give or take. I don't remember exactly. Talked to the guy and I got him down to $1,500. Now, when you're looking for a used car, many people have asked me, what do you recommend? You know, it's pretty typical. Hondas, Nissans, Subarus, they're all good cars. They're all great to drive. I wish I could say the same about this one. So I picked this one up off of a 20-year-old or 20-year-old something. I found out later that he hadn't driven this thing in over 3 years. It was bought and parked and until decided what his father wanted to drive. And eventually, after 3 years, his father was just like, you know what? I don't want it. You can sell it. So he sold it. When I bought this car, he basically told me at that time that be warned that the radiator fans do not work. So, of course, naturally speaking, my first concern was, well, did it ever overheat to a point that you're going to do a head gasket problem? He assured me, no. He's like, I drove it. If it ever got too hot, I shut it down, or I didn't drive it that much because of that issue. All right. So I figured for $1,500, it's probably a quick fix. And before I really go much further into this video, if you were to buy a car and they were to tell you that the radiator fan was not working, what would you think is the problem? What would you guys think could cause that problem? And put it in the comments below, and let's see if we're on the same brain or on the same page, same wavelength. So for me, when someone tells me that a radiator fan is not working in a car, I'm going to start thinking the obvious. Fuses, relays, could be the fans, might be the wiring, could be the ECU. So typically, I started doing some general troubleshooting, and what I found was that here in the main fuse box, these relays here, these three, they control the these three and this one over here actually, but these three are your main ones, and these three control what happens when the radiator fans are operating. So what I found immediately was I was able to test all three relays, and they worked. And in Subarus, if you really want to check relays really quick, find the one that's under the hood for the horn relay. If your horn works and you swap a relay in there and the relay still makes your horn work, you know the relay is good. So that's what I did. Swap relays back and forth. All of these worked. So I was like, okay, the relays are good. So to get the car home, I pulled out, I can't remember which one, I think it was possibly this one. And I just stuck a jumper wire between the contacts and the primary fan came on. So I was like, perfect. I will just drive home like that, and we'll go slow, and I won't have any worries, and I'll get home, and then I'll start doing some troubleshooting on this. Well, let me tell you, when you say the word troubleshooting, this went beyond troubleshooting. This actually became a whole level of frustration to a point where I have never in my many years of working on a vehicle ever got to a point where I was so frustrated and so upset that I basically had to step away from this thing for quite a few days because it was so upsetting that I was physically to a point where I was like, you know, I don't even want this car anymore. It's like, if this is the start of issues, then I don't want it. But then I got thinking to myself, well, I only paid $1,500 for it. If I'm going to sell it with all these issues, I'm not going to get any money for it. So I was like, you know what? We're just going to have to figure this out. We're going to have to fix it. So I went back to the basics and, you know, again, did all the fuse checking in here, checked all the relays, everything was good. So from there, what I did is in the car, on this one is a 2007, right beside the steering wheel, right there is the fuse box. So checked all the fuses. Again, they were all good, no issues. So, okay, relays are good. And the fuses are good. So why aren't they working? So what I started doing was doing some general checks on this thing. Another thing that can sometimes happen, which causes the fans not to work, is down here, right there, is the engine coolant temp sensor. And that sensor will basically send a feed back to the ECU to say, this is what the ECU is seeing as the temperature. And if it's too hot, we'll turn the fans on. If it's too cold, we'll let it be. Well, I was noticing some discrepancies in the cooling fan in that sensor. So I replaced it. Discrepancies went away. And by discrepancies, what I was finding was that the coolant temperature sensor was either not reading properly, or it wasn't reading quick or slow enough. And a way that I did that was I have a temperature gun, basically stuck it on the pipe here and was watching what the temperature of that was versus what the ECU was saying. Well, now how do I know that? Well, you can use a bunch of different software through your OBD2 port and use your phone, use your laptop. Thankfully, because I like Subarus, I have a Tactrix cable and I can use ROM Raider and it does all the logging and gives me all the information. So once I changed out the sensor, I noticed everything was good. So at that point, I was getting really like, what is going on with this car? And so I knew that the relays were good, the fuses were good, and the engine coolant temperature sensor was good. So now what could it be? Well, the other thing that you can do is down at the bottom, way down in there, on both sides, are plugs for the fans. And if you look on a wiring diagram like I have here, so here's your wiring. Basically, there's 4 wires. 2 of them are ground, as you can see here. So these 2 are ground. And then there's 2 more wires. And these 2 wires will basically give low and a high speed to the fan. So all you got to do is pull the fan out, put a jump wire on the ground and put it to the battery. And then do the same thing for the other 2 wires. Jumper to the 1 wire, put it to the battery. If it turns on, it'll either be the low or the high, and you'll be able to tell the difference. So pulled out both fans. There's one there and there's one there. And I did the exact same test on both fans. And so the fans worked. So now again, I'm like, what is going on? I got good fans, good relays. I've got good fuses. So I'm like, all right. The majority of the general troubleshooting that I can do, or that most people would be doing, has been done. So what do I do? So the first thing that I did before I did all of this was I checked to see if there was codes. There was a code. I don't remember specifically what the code is. I think it was P0067 or 76. Whatever that was, I'll put a screenshot in showing you what that is. And basically it's about a low input voltage code. Okay, so why is there low input voltage? How do we check that and what do we do? Well, we know the fuses and the relays were good. So again, back down to the fan connectors at the bottom. This time I went to the harness side that runs to the fuses. And from there, I checked the pin to see if there was 12 volts to those connectors. On the driver's side, there was, On the passenger side, there wasn't. Interesting. So one side has it, one side doesn't. So what's going on? So looking at some charts and going on YouTube, I found a video by Mr. Subaru, which I will link down in the bottom that you guys can reference it to. And he kind of went over a lot of what I did in this and what I did in my troubleshooting. The majority of what I did, he did in his video, and I followed his video all the way through. And he basically got to the point where I was at as well. And so the difference between him and I was he had access to an ECU. So he swapped out the ECU in his car and everything worked. So I was like, all right, well, I don't have another ECU. But let's look at the junkyard and see what they have. So I go to the junkyard, one car, one ECU, perfect match, pull it, take it home. Granted, this is a 2-hour trip, but luckily the ECU was only like 30 bucks, so I didn't really care. Put it in, same issue. All right. Now this is starting to get real frustrating, and I need to figure out what's going on with this real quick. So I go back to my diagrams, and as you can see here, all of the majority of this was good. So what we started doing was looking, so what triggers in this car, what triggers the fans to come on? So what I started noticing was, up here you can see the fuses, which I know are all good. But then I noticed down here that these fans go to the ECU. So I was like, okay. And if you watch Mr. Subaru's video, he shows how you can go to those pins on the ECU and you can check for voltage. And if there's voltage, he also shows how you can check to check and see if the fans turn on. So I followed his instructions. I went to my ECU and I found the pins that this thing says. And what I did was I had a copper jumper. I plugged it into one, or I checked the voltage on that pin first, 12 volts. Okay. Stuck my jumper in, grounded it, main fan come on. Great, awesome. Check the second one, no voltage. Jumpered it, ground it, secondary fan didn't turn on. Well, that's interesting. What's going on? Why does one work and why does the other one not work? So went back to my diagram and I noticed that based off of the ECU, off the ECU. Now this shows two. You'll see it says STES. Now depending on the cars, you can see up here it says STI and accept STI. So you'd have to pay attention to this. So looking at mine, I basically said, okay, C18 comes along, comes up, and it comes to this B62 connector and goes out to F45. Okay, so if you look down here, it shows F45 and it shows, this one doesn't show, I don't think. Yeah, so this one doesn't show it, but this one shows F45. So F45 is a 24-pin plug. All right, so if you have a service manual, this makes it much easier. If you do not have a service manual, you can go to like All Data DIY, and for I think like $20, you can get a monthly subscription. One-time cost, expires after 30 days, and you can get all the wiring diagrams and troubleshooting guides that you would get in the service manual. Now, granted, that's $20 every time you need to use it compared to the cost of finding a service manual if you can and paying a one-time cost. But generally speaking, you really shouldn't be needing a service manual that often if your car is running good. It would be a once in a few times thing, right? So if a service manual costs you $200 and you only ever need to use it once or twice, well, it's $40 instead of $200. So the service manual also shows you where all these connectors are in the car, sort of. So what they will say is it's in like that area, or perhaps that area. But what it doesn't show you is specifically where it's at. So for me, not knowing too much about wiring, when I look at this and it says F45 is a 24-pin connector, and it says it's in this area of the car somewhere, I go, I have no idea where it is. Where is it and which one is it? So I had to start doing some Googling, and What I found is people were saying that it's under the dash. Okay, well, the dash is a very wide, long area of the car. So we're at under the dash. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to try and find a light, because I don't remember where my light is. So I'll just use my phone. So after doing some farting around and looking through the internet and doing some digging, I got sort of a clue of where F45 was. And basically what I was told, or what I read, is that it's up and kind of to the left of the clutch pedal. So I was like, okay, well, that's a good start. So let's take a look and see what's underneath there. So if you go up under your dash, and this is on a 2007, but if you go up under your dash, right up in there, I'm trying to get some good light in here. You know what? I'll be right back when I get a proper flashlight so I can show you guys what it looks like up there. All right, flashlight in hand. Now I can show you guys this better. So if you look up under the dash, just to the side, so clutch pedal right there. If you look up, that one that my flashlight is shining on, black cable, that one, that connector right there, that's F45. And that cable comes in off the bottom, right in there, right there. That comes in from the firewall side, runs into this plug, and that plug off the top runs into the rest of the car. So what I started doing was, if you look, here's your wiring diagram. So here's that connector. So F45, that's the one that comes in from the, so this is coming in from side of the car, comes into the cabin. From the cabin, it runs into B62 or B52. I can't really tell from here. And then it runs down to the ECU. So the way to think of this is these two wires are running from the ECU, which is over there under the dash, runs into that connector that's over there under the dash, comes out to F45, and then runs out to the power. And where that connects is right under there. So what I did and what I started doing was now doing what I would consider is advanced to almost expert level troubleshooting. If you are at this point, you are at a level of mechanical that most people aren't. Most people aren't willing to dive into electrical like this, because electrical problems can be so hit or miss, or they can be so not hit or miss. But the problem with electrical a lot of the times is that it may work one time and it may not work another. So you start chasing and going, what the hell is going on with this wiring, and why can't I figure this out? So basically what I started doing is, because I knew where the wires were running, the ECU, which is down there under the floor, I pulled out the appropriate connector of where those two wires were supposed to go. And this is where the troubleshooting really started. So I basically took a pin, put it into C18, went to F45, or actually this B62 one, because that's the one that it connects into. So I went from C18 up to pin 2 on this connector, and I had continuity. Okay, that's good. So I know between here and here is continuity. So this wire inside the cabin is good. So I went to C29, and then I went to pin 12 on B62, and there was nothing. So I'm like, or sorry, I went from C29 to pin 12 on the B62 side, and there was continuity. So I'm like, okay. So if there's continuity from there to there and there to there, then you know what's inside the car has good continuity. So I'm like, okay, so I don't have to worry about that because that side is good. So then where you have to go is you have to start looking at your fuses or your relays. So for me, what I basically started doing was figuring out where these connected from there. So C18 runs up through the connector in the car, out, and then comes up somewhere into your harness. So subfan relay 1, main relay fan 1. So what I did with a jumper and C18, followed the wire, found number 7 in subfan relay 1 and 32 in main relay fan 1. Now, if you have the service manual will tell you which connectors or how to figure out where the connector is in that relay box. So what I did was C18 and then went to 32 and 7 and seeing where continuity was. So on C18, I had continuity to both sides. Okay, so I now know that this one was good and this side was good. So you can see how when these issues arise, how what you think can be such a simple problem with fuses and relays maybe gone turns into a very extensive level of troubleshooting. And generally speaking, when you're dealing with cars like this, or any car in general, the amount of troubleshooting that I've had to do for this is and was mind-boggling. And when I was doing this, it was getting to a point where I was so frustrated that my girlfriend came out in the shop one night and she kind of had to talk to me, and she was kind of like, okay, well, explain to me, and like you know I don't know. So explain to me what's exactly is going on to help perhaps you trace this out. So I was explaining to her what I was doing and what I was coming up with. And she goes, okay. And so I showed her and I started writing down notes. And what I discovered was when I went from C29, followed it through and went to 27 on the main fan and 22 on the subfan, no continuity. So what that told me is that I had checked that from the ECU across to that connector was good, both wires. So I knew that the ECU was getting it from there to there, and then from there to there on only one of the wires, but there's 2. Okay, so if it's good across and up on one, then why isn't it on the second? So what I had to do then was figure out where was it that the wires ran from there up and to get into this fuse box right there. Well, on Subarus, they run up the inside of the fender. So they come out of the car along your fender, and then they go through the hole and into the fuse box. Okay. So I knew from there to there was good, and from there to there was good on one wire. What I discovered was now apparently this brace on the sedans is only there on the 2.5s, but is not there on the WRX and the STI from my reading. Don't quote me, that's what I read. What happened was, at some point, this fender had been taken off, this brace had been taken off, and when they put it back on, as you can see, there's a bit of gap right here. This wiring harness ended up behind this brace and it was pinched. And as soon as I took off these 2 bolts and pulled this off, I could see exactly where it was pinched behind here, and I could see where the wires had already been split. So I looked at it and I go, all right, maybe that's the problem. Broken wires are never good when it comes to a wiring harness. So went back to my wiring diagram, traced out all the wires, and what I did and what I found was, yes, those wires that were broken here was that one wire that basically would run across and connect to here, but it would not make it into here. So what I did was I did another check from the ECU, which is over there, across to this wire, and I had continuity. Okay, so now I know that the continuity stops there. So from that side, I ran over to the fuse box, over here again, no continuity. Okay. So somewhere between this area was a break. So I found the 2 wires, grabbed a piece of jumper wire, connected them both. Again, ECU across, through the wire, to the fuse box, bam, it worked. So now what I had to do was check and see if the fans actually worked. So what I did was left it hooked up, grabbed my laptop, went into Radiator, fired up the car, and at that point the fans weren't working because the coolant temp was too low, so the car was like, nah, I'm perfectly fine. So there's 2 things that you can do to kind of fool the car into thinking it's too hot. And the first is the not so good way, and that's basically just keep your heater off and let the car run, and eventually I'll get up to temp. The other option is, if I remember correctly, what I did was I took the plug out of the engine coolant temp and I ran 2 wires between it and basically grounded it out, which made it think it overheated to see what would happen, and the fans came on. Okay, so I know taking out the coolant temp sensor and doing what I did by a jumper, that the fans come on. Both fans come on. Sweet, perfect. So I took the jumper out, plugged it back in, and then basically what I had to do was I had to now wait and sit and let the car warm up. And when the car warmed up and it got up to 205 degrees, the main fan came on. Perfect. That's what you want. 205. Subaru has it, I think, around 205, 206, that the main fan will come on. Around 212, I think it is, and higher, the secondary fan will come on. And so that's what it did. So I was like, perfect. Both fans are now coming on. So now what I had realized was that the code that this thing was throwing, P0067 or 76, again, I'll make note of which one it was, and the low input voltage, I now understood what that meant as well. Because it's never, you never can really tell or find what those mean. Maybe if you're a Subaru tech, or maybe if you're like gone through mechanicals training or anything like that, you might know what that means. But myself personally, I had no idea what that meant. After doing the troubleshooting and realizing that there was no continuity and that there was no power at the ECU, when you get that low voltage input, or whichever the error message is, what it's saying is that the ECU itself, nothing else in the system, not fuses, not relays, not the fans, but the ECU itself is not seeing the proper voltage to allow it to trigger the fans through the relays to ensure that when it's at an overheating temperature or when it's at a normal temperature, the fans will come on. So for me, when I originally was buying this car and he was telling me $1,500, but the fans don't work, I thought, hey man, that's a great deal. But, you know, at the end of the day, granted, I only put like $40, you know, for the coolant temp sensor into this thing. At the end of that all, I mean, I did learn a lot of new skills. I learned a little bit better how to understand reading wiring schematics. It wasn't that I didn't know how, but I learned a little bit better. I improved my skills on tracing wires, understanding how that works. And so if you don't have those skills and you bought a car like this, what are you going to do? Most people are going to end up putting it into a shop, but the problem with that is you're going to be spending $100, $200 an hour, depending where you live, for them to do this. And I mean, granted, they might be able to do it a little bit quicker than what I did, but at the same time, it still takes time and it still costs people money for people to do this. And so that's why service manuals and sites like AllData are so invaluable because it allows this, you know, it allows people like you or me who perhaps doesn't have that skill set to be able to figure out through some wiring what is going on and how to troubleshoot and how to look at it and diagnose it and figure out where it's at. You know, and like as an example, when I pulled this fuse box out, there's wire here which provides 12 volt power to this entire fuse box. It broke. I tried taking it out from underneath and it broke. So I had to buy an entire new fuse box. You know, and if you look at Subaru prices, it's like $100, $120 brand new for this thing. And so I just went to the junkyard and picked up another one for $20, $30 or whatever it was, right? So, you know, It's not difficult, but it's time consuming. You know, I have to take the bumper off. I got to take the fender off. I had to do all this stuff to this car to get to this point. And granted, I fixed the problem. But then, because I never had a real good chance of driving this because it was overheating, I discovered it had another problem that I basically lived with and still am living with that I have to fix, which will be in another video, and more diagnosing and more troubleshooting and figuring out. And so it's like, you know, at what point do you cut a vehicle like this as a loss and just move on? But myself personally, I am way too conscious that if I was to sell a car like this to somebody and they have a problem with it, I could obviously sell it and be like, as is, it's got this problem, but I'm not going to get the money I want for it. So I'm willing to take the time and the energy and go through it, fix it, get it running right, and then if I decide to sell it, then I'll sell it. Do I want to sell it? Not yet. I still enjoy very much driving the car, and so I want to fix it and get it running. So I just thought, you know, most of my videos a lot of the time are, you know, wrenching on something, taking stuff apart, putting things back together, you know, doing some fabrication, whatever it is. And I realize that this one is a little bit more of a talking head, you know, looking at diagrams, understanding how you do some troubleshooting, how you figure out doing some stuff. And I know it's outside of my norm, but, you know, I figured, like, as an example, if I've been able to learn something from my experience of doing this, hopefully those of you who watch this can learn something. As an example, you now know where the F45 connector is, and that's not something that's easy to figure out or find on the internet. The manuals tell you kind of where it's at, but they don't explain to you where it's at. Well, now if you watch this video, you kind of will know exactly where to look within your car if it's still within the same reason. I'm going to say that for the most part, in this generation of these GD chassis, which I think is like 2002 to 2007, it's probably on the same spot. So if you have this car and you're trying to find that connector, you'll be able to find it now. So I hope, you know, at the end of it, looking at wiring schematics, looking at wiring fuse boxes, seeing where wiring harnesses go, learning where the ECU is, learning where the F45 connector is. I hope that helps all of you guys in some way, shape, or form or another. There will be more videos on this car because, like I said, I have not only one, but I have two problems that are going on with this. And just to give you some quick insight, because they will be coming, my second problem with this is it's in limp mode. And basically, I can't go over 4,500 RPM in this thing. You go on the highway, you try accelerating, it will fall flat on its face and will not allow you to do that. I know what the general issue is. I have a fix for it, but I haven't gotten around to it. The other issue with this is that a couple of weeks ago, I was driving this thing around for 3 months without a problem. I got into the car to go to work Monday morning and it doesn't start. It's a very interesting problem. I don't understand why it's happening, but again, it's going to be another video. So I appreciate you watching. I appreciate you listening. If you decided to make a guess at what could have possibly been wrong with it at the beginning, maybe you were right, maybe you were wrong. If you were wrong or incorrect, now maybe you have a way of understanding how you can troubleshoot that, and maybe it will help you decide if you would want to buy a car like this or not. Either way, appreciate you watching and coming, and look forward to more content, and we will see you in the next one.